Right, okay, let's get going. Hello again, everybody. It's really great to be back. Excuse the motorbike just passing outside my window. It's been a while since we've run an offshore rig review, but good to be here. Got a great lineup of presenters coming up. Quick couple of points. The session will be available as a recording afterwards to everyone that's attending today, so thank you very much. Q&A button at the bottom of your screen as normal. Please use that to submit any questions through the session. If there's anything that we can answer in line, we will do. And then if not, we will deal with those offline or indeed at the end of the session. I'm actually going to hand over now to my colleague Alex, who's going to actually introduce herself and tell you who else is coming up on the agenda today. Alex, over to you.
Thank you, Gareth, and hello, everyone. I'm Alex Middleton, and I just wanted to briefly introduce myself as the newest member of the offshore team. My primary focus is maintaining the global rig requirements and combining Westwood's comprehensive analysis on the rig, subsea, and marine sectors to provide a detailed and holistic approach for assessing future drilling demand. I'm currently involved in the design of our upcoming Offshore Rig Market Quarterly Report, which should be available to RigLogic subscribers in the new year. So moving on to today's agenda. We'll begin with a summary of the offshore rig market, global supply, demand, and utilization figures for jackups and floaters, global leading edge day rates, changes in rig supply with a review of attrition and new build deliveries, outstanding rig requirements, regional demand outlooks for the Americas, North Sea, Africa, Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Australia. Then we'll end with final thoughts on the offshore rig market. After the Q&A session, you'll be invited to stay on the call for the latest RigLogic's user group session and product demonstration. So thank you for the time, and I'll pass you over to Terry for our presentation.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Thanks, everybody, for being here today. So I'll try and make this as painless as possible. As Alex said, we're going to be talking about quite a few things today and get into some regional analysis on markets that we think will be ones to watch in the coming year. So obviously, the rig market's getting pretty interesting, and obviously, I'm sure all of you know the Noble Maersk Drilling merger that was announced just this morning, so certainly getting even more interesting. But on to the presentation. Global drillship utilization has rebounded to over 90%, and we'll have a slide on that here coming up. The jackup fleet is pretty much stable. Semis have kind of been lagging, and we'll see all those numbers again shortly. Specifically for drill ships, the U.S. Gulf of Mexico drillship utilization's at 100%. And the recent day rate fixtures certainly reflect that, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well. New rig deliveries remain mostly dormant. The Chinese certainly have delivered some jackups in the past year or so. I think primarily they've gotten those into Mexico, Middle East, and some into Southeast Asia. So they've certainly managed to make their way into the market, but floating rigs, not much delivery there going on at the moment. As far as attrition, there's certainly plenty of attrition candidates, which we'll see coming up in the stack fleet, but attrition has certainly slowed way down this year, and we'll take a look at those numbers and talk about maybe why that is. Contract rollovers, there's certainly, we all know rigs roll over on their contracts all the time. There's a lot, though, that certainly have options that we think will likely be extended. And there's certainly others that have contracts that pending that probably aren't quote unquote public yet. So we think that a lot of these rigs will keep working when they get to the end of their current deals. In terms of the jackup market, the Middle East obviously is far and away still the world leader in the excuse me, in the jackup market. There's a recent Saudi Aramco tender, and we'll talk about that later, and that probably is only going to add to that. Crew costs starting to rise, and when you can find them, and this is something that's always been an issue for rig owners, is finding and keeping Crew, I was at a conference just last week where a land driller was talking about the crew and how they're having to get creative and have more job fairs and that sort of thing, trying to attract interest. So that's always been a problem. It's going to continue to be a problem. So particularly as these rigs become or get reactivated and come back into the market. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on. And we can go to the next slide there, Garrett. So looking at utilization, we talked about that. We talked about the drill ship utilization, which is on the far right-hand side. You see 92%. Now, what I've done, there's a lot of different ways to view utilization and to calculate it, depending on what you're trying to show, who's doing it, et cetera. But this 92% includes everything that's contracted, plus any idle rigs that have future commitments coming up, because those rigs essentially are not available for hire. So certainly the number is higher at 92%. If we weren't counting the future commitments, obviously, and just looking at contracted, it's going to be down in the 80s, but still, you can certainly see the improvement that market's made, particularly in the last 2 years. You see the marketed utilization, and this is marketed utilization as well, I should add, which essentially excludes cold stacked rigs. You can see the marketed utilization up 17% since October of 2019, driven a lot mainly by the supply decline that's happened in that time. Demand actually compared to October 2019 is actually 3 rigs lower. However, you've had the large fall in supply, so we've certainly seen utilization pick up. In the past few years, when supply would fall, demand was also falling, so we always saw utilization going down mostly, but now with demand staying stable and even in some cases rising slightly, you get the improvement in utilization. In terms of the jackup utilization on the left-hand side, the jackup supply has only declined by a net of 10 units in the last 2 years, but demand is down by 23 over that time. So you see overall a slight decline in utilization, but fairly stable, but certainly a slight decline still. Lastly, semis, same sort of story there. You see a sharp decline in supply in the 2 gray areas at the top, and that's resulted, of course, in a 5% decline, as you see there, in marketed utilization. Those numbers have been gotten to, supplies fallen by 20 in the past 2 years, but demand was also down by the same amount. So, and it's dropped by 5 just since April. So you see that that's what's resulted in the utilization drop. So drill ships, obviously, of the 3 major rig types, in the best shape at the moment, but certainly some things happening that could increase that jackup count, and semis, we'll have to wait and see. So go to the next slide there, Gareth. So in terms of leading edge day rates, and leading edge meaning what are the most recent rig fixtures? So if you're a drilling contractor, what could I expect to get for a rig? And if you're an operator, what would I expect to have to pay roughly? So what you see in these, and I'll start with drill ships again on the right-hand side of the page, they certainly had the sharpest decline since 2013, but they've also had the steepest increase in the past couple of years. And you can see the number of fixtures there that are over that 200,000 mark. Even the one highest one at the 454,000, which is for a 20K fixture, and admittedly maybe should not be counted, but I don't think it would really impact that line very much. But certainly you see a pretty tight band of rates in the past in 2021 and what we have for 2022 starts coming up. So not a wide range, just a few outliers there at the top right, but definitely trending on the right, in the right path, as we talked about. For jackups and semis, obviously being non-harsh environment, because those rates are completely a different structure than what you see with the non-harsh environments. Again, you see sort of a flattish trend line there, slightly on the uptick. On the upper side of the trend line, you see the rates are in a very, very tight band. I think there's been a lot of fixtures, particularly in Southeast Asia, that have sort of been in that maybe 65 to 75 type range. Now on the bottom side, you see a lot wider gap there. It's probably as low as 30,000, probably up to the 60, 65,000. So quite a wide range overall, but it's at least has reversed itself and is at least on a slight uptick. Semis are actually on an uptick as well. You see the main bulk of those rates in recent fixtures well above the line, well above 200,000, and you only see a handful below that. I think the high fixture rates have taken place in South America and Australia. The lower ones primarily in Southeast Asia and a couple in India. So I think that's what's dragged that number down. We can go to the next slide. So getting into rig supply, there's certainly been, as I just detailed in the utilization numbers, there's certainly been big changes in rig supply. You can see on the left-hand side on the slide there, all of the attrition that's taken place, particularly in 2019 and 2020, very high numbers. I talked about in the opening slide how attrition is certainly way behind, and you can see that the 2021 includes sort of what we forecasted, but to date, there's been 26 rigs taken out of the fleet. Now that compares to the same time in 2020, there had been 44 rigs removed from the fleet. So as I mentioned, attrition has certainly slowed down, which I think has probably surprised and maybe disappointed a lot of people. But this is generally how it happens when the rig market starts to improve. Drilling contractors, they just do that. They slow down attrition, and it's no different in this little uptick. You couple that with 7 cold stack drill ships that have received contracts lately, and so you get a combination of things going on, and attrition is going to slow down. Now we have sort of forecast, I think, 14 jackups. I think there's been 12 retired to date this year, so a couple more we think will occur by the end of the year. Possibly the same with drill ships and semis. So the forecasted numbers for 2022, you see 12, 10, and 6 there for the rig types. With attrition, we believe it's really more a question of when, not if. There's certainly, as we look at the numbers on the right, there's still certainly plenty of attrition candidates, and we think that a lot of these ultimately will end up being retired or scrapped, but it's just a question of when, not necessarily if. This year as well, we've seen certainly not just scrapping, but we've seen other reasons for rigs being taken out of the fleet, converted to MOPUs. We've had a couple of actually rigs converted to wind installation units and some other things. Rocket launching stations, I think a couple of semis were retired and bought for that and to be used for that. So certainly a lot of non-conventional uses and non-drilling uses in addition to just scrapping. So but if we look at the numbers on the right-hand side, you see in the middle of the pie chart, 101 of the 201 stacked rigs have expired SPS dates. In many instances, these rig owners, a lot of these rig owners probably don't have money to spend on SPS. The rigs will continue to just sit idle, and I think ultimately that leads into what I mentioned previously, that a lot of these will be retired. It's just a question of when. When you look at the stack times, at the idle times, what you see is that floating rigs in the less than 6 months and the 6 months to a year, there's certainly a lot of jackups in that. And I think most of the stacked semis, most of the stacked floaters are probably in there. Although I think that may be even on the floaters. They may be maybe just as many stacked less than a year as there are on the left-hand side. But you see, particularly on the left-hand side, 94 jackups stacked at least 1 year, and over half of those stacked more than 3 years. So, and you see 74% of that total's cold stacked, 58% of the 1 to 3 years. So clearly these are rigs that haven't been active in some time, will most likely continue not to be active. I think there was one jackup contract recently for a rig that had been stacked for a while in the North Sea. So certainly possible that some could come out, but overall, I think the majority, I would still be of the opinion that most won't. Now, I think on the floater side, I think these cold stacked rigs that receive contracts, I think that was probably a surprise to a lot of people, even though these rigs are not old, and you would have thought that maybe some of these contractors wouldn't have the money to do reactivations. So clearly, it can certainly happen, and will, no doubt. There will be others brought out, but by and large, I think a lot of these rigs that have been stacked for particularly for longer periods, most won't be coming back. We can go next, Gareth. So when we talk about rig requirements, I think this is certainly one of the main drivers for future rig demand. I mean, obviously, oil price drives all of it. I should add that all of this assumes we've seen oil prices $80, $85. We've seen most forecasts pretty much say that scenario is going to remain in place. We've heard OPEC Plus talking about maintaining bringing production back slowly and so forth. So the elements for oil prices to remain in a decent range are pretty high. So I would think that would drive a lot of these projects to probably go ahead and get started. Now, we had obviously a lot of these programs in 2020 that were moved into this year and even next year. And I think we'll probably see that some of these will even get pushed into 2023. But in looking at these numbers specifically, particularly on jackups, the North Sea and Southeast Asia by far, in terms of both the number of requirements and the rig days, are far and away the two leading areas. And in fact, I'll point out the North Sea for both jackups and floaters. It's the second, North Sea being the second highest in terms of days on the floater requirements. That might surprise some people. And the UK within the North Sea, in both instances, is far and away has the most requirements. So certainly bodes well for that. And I think a lot of that work could continue to be P&A type programs that we've seen started. And I think there's been a lot of press even recently about decommissioning in that region and the need for that coming up. So a lot of that work may end up being P&A, but there's certainly still a lot of drilling to go on. Within the North Sea, speaking of on the jackup side, there's seven requirements in Norway and 38 in the UK. That's the split. So almost 5 times as many. When I say programs, rigs that are in some form of rig inquiry, being the expression of interest, pre-tender, or tender. So that's the numbers when I'm referencing those. But other areas that on the jackup side, obviously the Middle East is kind of I mentioned the Saudi Aramco. Those days actually will likely end up skyrocketing. And I'll explain that when we get into the Middle East section, but a lot of long-term contracts in that area. So still quite a few rig days, but you see still the two areas mainly for jackups are the ones mentioned there. On the floater side, obviously 2 of the 3 top areas are in the so-called Golden Triangle, which is the US Gulf of Mexico, South America, and Africa. And the Gulf and those regions in the Golden Triangle, those are certainly get a lot of attention from rig owners. And when I speak to people, those are the ones that they always talk about. Africa, as you can see, being on top, Now, a lot of those programs in Africa are not necessarily from the quote traditional countries that you would see in that region, such as Angola, although there is certainly some floater work in Angola, but the country within Africa that has the most requirements outstanding is Namibia, which I'm sure I wouldn't have guessed, and maybe some of you may not have guessed either. So Nigeria certainly is still in there. There's certainly still a lot of deep water potential there. Angola does have 8 programs in rig inquiry, so certainly still activity in some of those traditional countries, but in the North Sea, it's a little more balanced, 21 programs in Norway, 43 in the UK, so only twice as many in the UK versus Norway. Again, I would point to Australia, and Australia for looks like it's in 4th position for both jackups and floaters, certainly being such a small region, and there's obviously only certain rigs that can work in that region, so that bodes well for those rig owners there with all the work that they've got going on. And you see 15 different programs either in tender or pre-tender expression of interest. So certainly quite a bit of work for that area. So in all the requirements, I think, as you can see by all of the regions, there's certainly work in all of them. You can see there's a number of outstanding tenders still on the books. It's just a question of, in some regions, there may not be rigs or operators may have to wait. Some of these could get pushed out, as I mentioned, so forth. But at this point, there's certainly plenty of work, it looks like, to be had. So we'll move on now and take a look. I think, as Alex said, I think there's 6 regions that we're going to take a look at that we think are warrant watching in the next year. We've only done this through 2022, but North America, that being, of course, U.S. Gulf of Mexico, and Eastern Canada. So you see total 101 units in North America. Then you see the split there, mostly jackups, of course, and that's driven by Pemex's fleet and a lot of cold stack jackups in the U.S. sector of the Gulf. You see 11 semis and 19 drill ships. As I talked about, all the drill ships are in the U.S. Gulf, 100% contracted. Now those percentages are total fleet, just total contracted, not marketed, et cetera. You see 24 cold stacked units, as I talked about, 21 jackups. A lot of those are in the U.S. Gulf, 3 semis. 1 semi that's stacked at the moment that does have I believe, a contract coming up with Pemex, as you see there. In looking at the contract awards so far this year, 48, and this is just new contracts awarded, 33 in the U.S. Gulf and 14 in Mexico, 1 for Eastern Canada, that's a semi. And this is just new deals, not options, not priced options, any of that sort of thing. So actually quite a bit of contract activity going on. Jack up, the day rates haven't really moved all that much. You see averaging 68,000 for the new fixtures this year. I think in the U.S. Gulf, it's pretty much 65,000, and that's regardless of what rig type it is, being water depth, what water depth rating. Mexico, they've been slightly higher, but not a lot higher than that. The 258,000 for the new floater fixtures in 2021 is certainly driven, obviously, by the U.S. Gulf drill ships. You see the one fixture there, the high this year at 335,000. The 4 most recent fixtures have averaged almost 282,000, as you can see there. So I think the bulk of the fleet in the drill ships in the U.S. Gulf, the rates, the fixtures pretty much range from about 230 to 290. That's kind of the range. And then there's a couple of these outliers, such as the 335, and I think there may be 1 or 2 on the opposite side as well that are a little bit lower, but a pretty good range, and those have certainly gone up substantially over the past year. In looking at the rig days and the rigs, the contracted rigs, as you can see there, 22,000 days accumulated in 2020, certainly a little bit higher than 2019. and a little bit higher so far in 2021. That could certainly go up as we finish out the year, but in the backlog for 2022, we've already got over 14,000 days, and you can see the split in the rigs between jackups and semis and ships. And obviously the blue portion of the bar to be awarded, that's all the outstanding tenders. So obviously, I think all of those jagged lines are going to go up as we get some obviously more contract awards for work next year. Estimated 66 rigs average to be contracted next year. And as you can see by the top of the bar there for 2022, that's approaching or maybe even a little bit higher than 2019 levels. So and higher than last year, and higher than the majority of 2020 when the market then went down. So all in all, shaping up to be a decent year. Pemex obviously will keep working its jackups. There's certainly been some issues, I think, with them and payment to drilling contractors. I think Seadrill just said they have been paid and are caught up. So hopefully that's the same with the other contractors. Rigs moving in and out of this region. There's 3 rigs scheduled to move to other regions in 2022, but there's also 3 confirmed to be coming into this region from other areas. So one other one potentially coming here that will hopefully confirm shortly. So not going to be a lot of supply change, but hopefully, demand keeping on that track. South America, again, as I talked about a couple of slides ago, this is probably the most watched region in the world, or one of 2, I would say. And you can see by what's forecasted in 2022 in terms of the to be awarded, and you see the number of rigs, 39 rigs working, and already 75% of as many contract days for 2022 as what there is for 2021. So I think that certainly bodes well. But as in terms of the current market, there are 47 units total. You see 12 jackups. The jackup fleet in this region is primarily in Venezuela, and which we're not really covering in this. And you see 17% contracted. I think there's 2 that we know of that are contracted there, but 13 semis. And again, just like the U.S. Gulf, 100% contracted utilization for the drill ship fleet. The semis, 77% contracted, but I think that only constitutes 4 rigs. So I believe there's 8 of the 12 or 9 of 13 or something that are contracted at the moment. So it's not really that many rigs that it would take to move 77% to 90%. It wouldn't take much at all. So, but you see 6 units cold stacked, and of course 3 jackups and 3 semis. Although I know the one semi, that one of the 3 that's cold stacked, has been bid on some international work. So obviously, if it happens to be awarded that work, then obviously it will be reactivated and leave the region. One drill ship on standby that will begin a long-term contract for Petrobras shortly. So again, some new contract awards this year as well, 15 drill ship and 8 semis. So again, not including price options. There are 14 of those in Brazil, 6 in Guyana, 3 in Suriname. So you can see it's not just Brazil anymore. Obviously, Guyana has been going and blowing for the past couple of years, but Suriname and Trinidad certainly hasn't been as much activity there in the past few years. So certainly good to see some other countries getting into the game there. So recent drill ship rates, you see average for drill ships 222 and just over 203,000 a day for semis. I think overall the drill ship rates, and this has been where we've really seen a really wide range of bidding going on, particularly on some of these drill ships and even some of the semis, where you will see a bid for Petrobras come in, and you see rates anywhere from 170 to well over 300,000. So you get a really wide range of bids, and some of those rigs have gotten the work, although a lot of them have ended up getting disqualified for one reason or another. But it's certainly still been a wide range. But I think the high rate, there's been one fixture over there at 329,000. I believe, I don't know if that was a renewal or a new deal, but certainly similar to the US Gulf. But I think obviously the bulk of the market is certainly underneath that. Semis, certainly, again, it's the same scenario. It's been a wide range of rates from as low as around just under 140 to as much as 265,000 a day. So certainly been just as wide ranging over there. But I think as we talked about in the beginning, you see the days and the to be awarded a number of rigs, and there's certainly a reason why this region is where it is in terms of how it's viewed by the contractors particularly. And there's no reason to believe that it won't be this and possibly even more. I think for jackups, on the jackup side, you could see some, and probably will see some activity in Suriname from their shallow water licensing round, although the term shallow water is certainly will involve some floating rig requirements as well. So it's not all just shallow water in terms of jackups, but we could certainly see some jackups added to the mix if that country gets that part going. So go on to the North Sea now. We talked obviously a couple of minutes ago about the requirements and how the North Sea had the most of any for jackups and floaters of any region in the world. So you can see the fleet breakdown there, 71 units split pretty much evenly between jackups and semis. You got 5 cold stacked, which really isn't that many, 15 hot and warm stacked, but you've got one of those jackups and 5 semis under long-term contracts. So stacked, but under contract, it certainly happens over there. Norway, obviously, the jackup rates, quite a high number, 285,000 for a lot of those harsh environment jackups. And there's certainly some rates that are above 300,000 on the jackup side. Semi rates averaging 275,000 for new fixtures, for recent fixtures. So there's certainly some rates higher than that as well. In the UK, we've seen jackup rates. Admittedly, we don't have a lot of rates in that region for jackups, but probably in the 80s in the UK sector. I think semi rates there averaging 147. I think in Norway, jackups are the non-harsh environment probably up to as high as 125,000. I think I saw, and of course we talked about the harsh environment ones. 37 firm contracts awarded this year, mostly jackups. So certainly some good activity still going on. 39 units were contracted a year ago, over 16,000 rig days. So this year, in 2021, the number of contracted units up to 46, and you see the rig days 16, over 16, almost as much as in 2020, obviously below 2019. Again, it's a similar story for 2022. You've already got 14,500 rig days for next year. So with all the requirements that we illustrated in a couple of slides ago, that certainly bodes well for the rig market there. Again, 59 rigs forecast to be working. And again, that's very much akin to 2019 levels. So could be a rebound year for the North Sea market. So Africa, of course, this is another region. We saw on the requirements, this had the most on the floating rig side. You see the recap there, 46 units, 19 jackups, and mostly the rest 27 floating rigs. You got 12 cold stacked units, Las Palmas there being one of the major stacking regions in the world. So 10 drill ships currently under contract, another 6 idle with future commitments. So the 86% utilization is just for what's under contract, but the other 6, now some of those other 6, in fact, most of them are for other regions. So we're not going to impact Africa so much, other than the fact that supply will be less. So you see 5 of the 7 recent drill ship contracts. As I mentioned, those are cold stack jackups that were in this region. Otherwise, you've got certainly with that and between jackups and semis, looks like 10 units scheduled to leave this area in 2022. So far, only 2 jackups and 1 ship that we know of that are coming here. So supply utilization obviously will take a big jump when these rigs get out of the market, and assuming demand stays stable to increasing, which, as you can see on the left side of the page, we're forecasting that to happen. It's the same story again in 2022. Very much similar to 2019 levels and well above 2021. You can see the rig days, already more rig days scheduled in 2022 than all of 2021. So this region, 15 rigs contracted in October 2020, 16 at this point. We talked about the 6 that are idle but have future commitments in place. So really it's 22. So this is going to be a major market for rig owners, and a lot of activity going on in the next year and probably the next few years. Middle East. So Middle East obviously is all jackup driven. There's a couple of different operators: Saudi Aramco, ADNOC, more recently Qatar Gas, and a few others that drive all of the activity. You see there are 163 jackups, 82% contracted, which is pretty good. Majority of those units in the Arabian Persian Gulf, the rest in Egypt and the Gulf of Suez. 18 cold stack rigs. There's a lot of old rigs here. This is a market where you certainly, with 163 units, you're going to find a lot of older rigs and older, sort of lower spec. And I think that there's I've got the number somewhere. There's over 40 rigs, I think, that are over. Well, actually, I have it in the notes, don't I? 41 units are 40 years or older, but 30 of those are contracted. So that gives you an idea of how well or how easily, I guess you could say, those rigs work in that market. We've referenced the Saudi Aramco tender. When I say 20 rigs offered, that's 20 individual rigs. What I've heard is anywhere between 36 and 40 rigs have been offered in total, but some of them are duplicates and offered by different configurations. So it's the first tender that Saudi Aramco has had since early 2020. And in fact, I think that one was ultimately canceled. So Saudi Aramco's not had a tender for quite a while. And there were 3 categories, and there are multiple rigs in each category, most likely. And that's why I was referencing in the requirements slide a few slides ago about that the number of rig days are going to shoot up once these contract awards are made, which is expected in, I believe, January, February next year. So I don't know. The question will be how many of these rigs are incremental. Will some of these be awarded to rigs coming to the end of contracts? That remains to be seen, but most likely to be some rigs added to that mix. You see the the backlog on the left. In 2021, there's actually more rig days than the past 2 years. So we've already eclipsed that 2019 level. And you see for 2022, already almost 36,000 with the to be awarded. We believe that the number of rigs contracted will reach about 137 next year, which would certainly be the highest in the last few years in that region. So no reason to think that activity in this region will slow down, and the operators that drive the activity now will be the ones that continue to drive it in the coming years. And lastly, regional wise, we'll talk about Southeast Asia and Australia. We saw Southeast Asia having the most jackup requirements. I think this is another region that certainly has the potential and most likely will increase its activity. You see there's 77 rigs there between those two regions, mostly jackups, 57 of the 77, 13 cold stacks. So this is another idle staging area where a lot of rigs are stacked, and that shows with the 13. And you see, obviously, most of those are also jackups. But the marketed utilization, nevertheless, is over 80%. The floater market utilization over 85%. So definitely good. You know, we all hear about what's the utilization mark for day rates to increase, and back when I was a young lad many years ago, it was 90%. It's the standards have been lowered now, and it's 85%. Supposedly, that's where you start to see a more significant step up in day rates. Now, we'll see if that happens. It has certainly in some regions. I don't think it has so much in this region. As I mentioned earlier, the jackup fixtures, you see the average 67,500 for Southeast Asia. There have been some in that low to mid 70s range, and maybe a couple even slightly higher, but there's also been a fair number in the 65 to 69,000 type range. So even though it's a small band, rates haven't really done that much there. But you see in Australia, obviously a different story. Operating at cost much higher there. Jackups get a lot higher day rates. You see 149,000 average. 30 new contracts awarded year to date. Obviously, most of those in Southeast Asia, only a couple in Australia. Most what's gone on in Australia have been options. But you see the 228,000 average day rate for Australia. I mentioned earlier that some of the floating rig rates have been the highest. And again, in Australia, same deal. The thing about this market, particularly Australia, as I mentioned, there's not a lot of rigs that can work here, that have the compliance, and rig owners are not likely going to spend the money that it takes and the time that it takes to get that acceptance certificate over in Australia. Even the Rowan Gorilla rig that's going to New Zealand from the North Sea, if that rig was to go to Australia, it would still have to undergo that process. So that even the fact that it's going to New Zealand doesn't mean that it automatically can work in Australia. So nevertheless, the thing that plagues this market is the tender times. There's programs that get tendered and retendered, and it goes on, and or they get canceled and then reissued and so forth. And so it takes a long time in many instances for these contracts to get awarded. But you see the potential on the left-hand side. Again, already 11,000, what is that, maybe 75% as many rig days for 2022 as in 2021. And with the to be awarded, we saw the number of requirements in this region. If they all, if they can find rigs and if they can do these things in a timely manner, I think some of this will end up getting pushed into 2023. But you see that it's certainly potential is there next year to, in terms 58 rigs annual average to be contracted. So certainly potential for it to be a very successful market there for rig owners. And the last slide, just some final thoughts. As we've kind of pointed out, we expect increase in rig demand in most regions. I think some may be stable, but I think most should improve. Certainly, there's still some COVID situations. I think Valaris, for instance, just had a jackup in the North Sea that had a COVID outbreak on it just this past week or two. So that's certainly being better managed, but they had to bring in a replacement crew, and so there's certainly crew fatigue, and that certainly is going to be a continuing need to be managed by the rig owners. more consolidation on the way. Well, we mentioned the Noble Maersk. That's certainly been rumored for a while, and it finally happened. There's certainly other companies, and you still have to look at Polaris, Seadrill, maybe Diamond Offshore, Odfjell, some of these other drilling contractors that certainly could be in play. So I don't think we're done on that by any stretch of the imagination. We just talked about the long tender process and sometimes unfavorable contract terms in Southeast Asia, where indigenous contractors get to the top of the line. So if you're a foreign contractor, you may not get work until all of those rigs in Malaysia that are Malaysian owned get work and things of that nature. So that's changing to some degree, but it's still there mostly. Operators are still very price sensitive. Well, when have they not been price sensitive? Is, would be my statement to that. But they certainly are price sensitive, and it's the way that this market works. Rig owners will try and push the rates, and operators will try and hold them down. But I think that there will be a spot that both sides can get to, that they're both happy with. How much day rates can go up at $80 to $85 oil, there's a question mark in my mind with that. I think you might need to see oil prices go up some more for rates to really go up. Although, every time I say that, something happens, and we've seen drill ship rates just under 350,000 already. Will there be something with a 4 in front of it? Maybe sooner than we might think. Based on what I'm told anyway, there may already be some bidding with 4s in front of them. I don't know that for certain, but it wouldn't surprise me. So certainly still some room to move up. I don't think we'll ever get to that 600,000 that we saw back in 2011, 2013 through that time zone, but still some room to move up. Pressure on rig owners to green their rigs. We know that there's certainly Maersk and Transocean probably being the two preeminent contractors in terms of making low emission type upgrades to their rigs. There's certainly some of the other contractors have done. Seadrill and Polaris have done similar some things as well to some of their rigs. That's going to continue. I mean, obviously the pressure is there, and it gets to the whole wind renewables sector. That's clearly coming, and it's coming maybe quicker than a lot of people thought it might. But I think in the foreseeable future, there's still certainly a place for the rig market and for rigs and drilling, and so that's not going away anytime soon. And with that, I will stop. I'm sure a lot of you are happy, and hand it back over to Gareth.
Thanks, Tony. That's great.